Let us begin a study of unit composition in Zerg versus Protoss. This map, New Gettysburg, is a map where attacking is a little bit more difficult, mainly because the shortest rush path is incredibly narrow, which means you can defend with few units at the exit of this particular ramp. So there are a lot of different fundamentals in StarCraft. One of them is unit composition, and this video will think about the stepwise process of creating some tools to deal with a stage of pressure, scouting what the opponent is going for, and then progressing to the next stage. The build order that I'm using has been covered in numerous videos. It's just hatch, gas, pool. The first scout happens here with the first Overlord. Really nice spot to keep this Overlord is right here. You can see whether this gateway is working. You can also keep an eye on how the Chrono Boost is being spent. Some pretty normal annoyances from the Protoss early on. One Adept goes into the main. Queens and drones are being pulled furiously to try and survive. I'm taking my third base. My second Overlord was going over to the opponent's third. Knowing how many bases your opponent has is very important for knowing how many drones you can potentially build and how many bases you can take. So I see a Stargate here with this Overlord. One thing that you can sort of infer is that this is 150 gas of a unit. If they made a unit, that's some additional gas, and there are more gateways here and no third base. So this looks a lot like an Adept Oracle opener. The follow-up will be Phoenix, and a really efficient way to deal with this pressure is using Queen Ling. Queen Ling is my composition at this stage of the game. I have Ling Speed, which means I can run around on the map, get lots of information, take the watchtower, push the Adept off my third, and then Queens are a great unit because they gain value over time and they scale really well into a late game Arnie by building up energy for transfuse. I like building 3 Queens before the third base is done, mainly for this sort of interaction here. The Oracle gets to my side of the map, and 2 Queens is about equivalent defense to 1 Spore. It might even be a bit better after the Queen range buff, because the Queens can shoot the Oracle from really far away. So I have 2 Queens defending against air units here, 1 Queen and 1 Spore here, and I don't have anything defending here because I don't have any drones. My follow-up to the Ling Queen is Bane Ling with melee. There's been sort of a gradual transition in how Zerg players tend to play against Protoss, away from the standard Roach maxing out and toward more Ling Bane. The reason for that is it takes a pretty long time for Roach Speed to kick in, and Ling Bane is a faster solution that prevents Adepts from being able to just shade back and forth between your bases repeatedly. So here, I see the opponent has sort of a defensive posture. They're taking their third Nexus, they have their gases here, so they're being pretty economical, which means I can respond by being economical and progressing in tech myself. One plan that is useful to develop for yourself is to understand what your order of gas spending is in a given matchup. In this matchup, I went for Ling Speed, my first 100 gas, and then Overlord Speed, which allows me to get a scout, and then I sent drones to my opponent's base. This is a very silly mistake. Sometimes you're microing your Lings and then you accidentally make a cycle of drones. By some form of magic and decision making I end up winning this game, but rip. Yeah, the important thing is Ling Speed, Overlord Speed, melee attack with the Bane Nest, Lair, and then once you get to Lair, you can go for things like Hydra Lurker. Droning up, droning up. Going for Hydra Lurker is a good thing to get into once you have all your gases at 3 base. Ling Bane doesn't require very much gas, which is why it's a really nice composition when you're droning up 3 base mineral. Once you have 3 base mineral, you can afford to take your gases, saturate your gases, and then take your 4th base and your macro hatch at the same time. I opted to go for a Hydra Den. If the opponent happened to go for a very high Phoenix count, Hydras are pretty good against that. And then Baneling ends up being a really nice complement to the Hydra, because units that do really well against Hydras, like Charge Zealots, Adepts, the Baneling crushes pretty effectively. I'm going straight for a Lurker Den here. The Hydra range upgrade isn't going to help me that much in this scenario. If there was a fight here, I could just have units distributed in an arc here. If they moved this way across the map, I could create a really big arc here. On this map in particular, I would say it's not very good for going for Hydra timings, mainly because of this narrow choke and the difficulty of making a big timing attack happen here. So Lurker Den is the solid sturdy choice. By having Lurkers in the game, I'm defending my 4th base saturation. So it went from Ling Queen to Ling Bane to Hydra Lurker is the composition progression. Bane drops are always nice for setting the opponent off balance. You also kind of manage their attention for a period of time. Anytime they're looking at their base to defend your harassment, they're not also attacking you. So it keeps things a little bit cleaner on your side of the map and causes them to have to deal with a mess. A really nice procedure you can get into the habit of doing against Protoss. If you have melee upgrade and you have Bane speed, just splitting off some group of Lings. I have 12 Lings on their own hotkey right here that are going to all morph into Banes, and then just keep rolling into this 3rd Nexus. It's really annoying for Protoss to deal with, and the damage is applied really, really quickly, so they have to react super fast. So I have the Ling Bane Hydra. I have a few Lurkers to fall back on if they go for a big attack. And then a nice thing you can do is run in, knock out the pylons if you can knock out probes, but hitting those pylons and killing a robo means that they won't be able to get a lot of immortals. Immortals are amazing units, so are Colossi and Disruptors. They can't make any of those things until this robotics is powered again, and they build another robotics. I would say that's a pretty nice trade. You can always fall back and take a fight on creep. Protoss units are generally more expensive and slower than Zerg units, so if both players are getting 200 supply, usually the Protoss player is going to have the more gas-rich composition. By trading out Banes consistently and giving them a bad time, you delay their progression to that first max out. So I'm making some more Lurkers. Usually, let's say maybe 10 to 12 Lurkers, you're pretty safe to get into Hive tech. So I should be dropping an Infestation pit, there it is. Right as I get 10 to 12 Lurkers, and then I'll take a Hive and a Spire at the same time. It lines up pretty nicely for you to be able to take a greater Spire whenever your Hive is done. Creep spread is very rewarding. They're a lot more cautious when they're moving out across the map to push into you. The Zerg can get a really good sort of orientation whenever the Protoss army moves in if the fight is taken on creep. Off creep, all the Zerg units move more slowly, so it's going to be a little bit better for the Protoss. This is the most important Zergling in the game right now. I can see when this base is taken. And then this is just a little run by I went for. I felt pretty safe, so I sent in some Lurkers. It didn't actually pay off that much, but it did, kind of like the Bane drop, control the flow of the action for a period of time. And here I'm trading out more Lings, just continuing to keep the Protoss on the defensive. I have so many Lurkers that it's pretty low risk for me to send those Lings at the opponent. So 16 Lurkers, I'm quite safe against ground-oriented pushes. Killing those Robos meant that they couldn't make as many Immortals. Immortals are a sort of counter unit to Lurkers. So by killing the Robos, I made the Lurkers better. There's Greater Spire. I've been staying on one Evo Chamber the whole game. I have +2 melee attack and +2 ranged attack. Now Protoss is starting to get into Tempest, because they're pretty aware that I've been teching up and Broodlord is a major possibility. They've been scouting me with Hallucinated Phoenix consistently, and then these 3 Adepts are getting some additional information. If a Protoss is going for primarily ground and then gradually switching into air, Broodlord is sort of the ultimate finishing unit, and then having some Hydra, Queen, and Corruptor to support those Broodlords, and even some Lurkers. This is a bit of a questionable engagement from me. We take a pretty nasty trade. One reason that this might be better than better for me than for the Protoss is because Zerg can produce army more quickly than Protoss can. So even if that trade wasn't super efficient, I know exactly what their army composition is, and it's going to take them longer to get back to 200 supply than it'll take me to get back to 200 supply. And I can also create a Broodlord-based composition rather than a Hydra Lurker-based composition. This cycle of Ling Bane is really important. So I'm harassing with mutas. This is sort of a nice thing you can mix in. 6 mutas means that you can one-hit probes. You can also defend against Warp Prism and keep things more kind of on your terms. When the Protoss is massing High Templar, the Storms are going to be very effective against Corruptors, Hydras. They can feed back Queens, but they're terrible against Ling Bane. This unit, like the Ghost, is a late-game caster unit that is countered by early-game basic units, like Ling Bane. So when I'm going for Broodlord, I'm not just going to mass Corruptor Broodlord, I'm going to have a lot of Ling Bane on the ground to kind of mow down these High Templar really fast. So I have 16 Corruptors, 81 Lings that I'm trading out, 27 Banes, and I'm making more Lings behind this. Tempests are pretty bad against Ling Bane. Immortals aren't very good at cleaning up Ling Bane, but they can absorb Bane shots pretty effectively. That was a pretty important kind of formation maneuver I did. I had a big clump of army right here, and I just boxed part of it and drug it down. If you have your army, splitting it into 2 groups means that you can A-move and get a more natural concave without having to furiously micro on the spot. So here I'm gradually mixing in Broodlords, but it's pretty important that I'm not going pure Broodlord. I still have a lot of Corruptors and a lot of Queens, and as this fight happens, I'm probably going to be making more Corruptors behind it, just because they're going so heavy into Tempest. 9 Tempest. So that's 9 Broodlord, 8 Corruptor. I still have a few mutas. It's good to keep some mutas in the game. If you go across and harass, just leaving like 2 or 3 means that you have something to do with Prism and little DT run by like this. So I grabbed some Lings and some Banes and an Overseer, hotkeyed them with the mutas to deal with any sort of harassment they want to leverage against me. Late game, your final worker count matters a lot because that's going to influence how much supply you have free to build army. This opponent has 5 more workers than me, which means that's 5 supply that they can't make into army that I can. As you have a lot of bases saturated, you have your static defense, it's acceptable to dip down a little bit, especially if you have slow units that aren't very good at kind of trading out and remaxing like Broodlords are. This also allows my army value to be pretty close to the army value size of the Protoss. So I have more minerals and slightly less gas in my army. It makes sense, I have a lot of Queens and Lings. And these Broodlords are kind of just denying the most recent expansion from the Protoss. I'm not aggressively trying to trade with their army, I'm just putting pressure on their economy. Because at this point their main is mined out, the natural is mined out, the 3rd is mostly mined out, 4th is a fresh base, and the 5th is a fresh base. My composition hasn't really changed, I'm just kind of slowly pushing into the Protoss. These Lings clean up all the probes there. And then here, transfuse becomes pretty important. Every time you transfuse a Broodlord or a Corruptor, it's basically like getting a free one. You're converting Queen energy into army value. And then this is just a really nice A-move scenario. Because my composition was better, I could A-move pretty freely into the opponent's army. Ling Bane with some Queens, into Hydra Lurker, into Hive, into Broodlord Corruptor, but then still making Ling Bane.